It's back. He hits two back. He's done it. Sharma has done it. In the end, delirious.
Hello and welcome to The Last Wicket, a cricket podcast that is perfect for your commute or when you prefer cricket chatter in your ear when you're doing some work. I'm your host, Benny, and I'm joined by my co-host, Himanish.
Hey guys.
So Mayank and Nish will not be joining us today, but we do have a returning guest for the first time in the brief history of this podcast. James Marsh is back, and we'll be talking all things about the recently concluded test series between India and England, all the talking points, controversies, and what this all means for the immediate future of both test sides. So stay tuned. But first, I want to talk with Himanish about what's going on currently. So India and England have moved on from the test series and are playing T20 internationals. Obviously, things are a lot different because England are surprisingly, or not surprisingly, much better in the limited overs than India is, I feel. So two T20 internationals in, the series is tied 1-1. Himanish, what are your thoughts on the series so far?
I mean, it's been a case of win toss, win game up till now, right? But
Yeah.
the two games were slightly different in the sense that I thought the pitch for the first game was sort of hard to bat on. It was a little bouncy. And England bowled magnificently well. Like they bowled those hard lengths. I put out a tweet with the graphic where their pacers had bowled that hard length, which was hard to hit. And India just couldn't make enough runs. And India, I think, picked three spinners, and they just kept bowling in the slot, and England were too comfortable. Today, I thought India were really good with the bat because they kept talking about taking this new attacking approach. And
Right.
with Ishan Kishan and Sky in the batting order, I think they're moving towards that optimal batting order. And it really paid off today because Pant was also very free. He was trying to hit from ball one. Ishan Kishan was very good like he does for Mumbai. Kohli was a very nice anchor. So the
Right.
batting worked out perfectly for India today. I didn't watch the bowling innings too, carefully. But yeah, the batting was perfect for India. And I think they should stick with this template. It's bound to fail sometimes because it's a high-risk approach. But I think they should stick with this sort of batting template.
Yeah, and I don't think there's much to be said about England because for a while now they've been consistently very good in the white ball format, and their batting essentially is leading the way, in the international field with their approach to just go hard from ball one all the way to the end, and they have like they're packed with batsmen and bowlers who can bat. So that approach worked out well for them in the first game, where honestly it was a below par total, so it was not too much of a worry. um, I, I was more interested in seeing how India was going to do this series because one, they're up against this really tough and high quality side, but there was a lot of talk pre-series about this intent and this new approach, which we've heard so many times, only for India not to actually do that on the field. And based on the first game, I was thinking, here we go again. All the talk about new intent, new approach, but then we go there and we're like going at like run a ball, and then we post like it was not even a challenging total. So I thought that's not going to be much different. So it was good to see Ishan Kishan back in, or not back in the side, but included in the 11, and then Rishabh Pant maintained. They're continuing to give him this long rope, it feels like, in the top four, and you could see the approach. And with a back in form Kohli, suddenly India's batting seems to be on par with England's batting in T20s. So I think that's a good sign for India. As far as the bowling is concerned, I think again we don't have Bumrah yet, but if Bumrah is back in the side, and if Hardik Pandya continues to bowl like he did today, I think we would be a complete team. And I'm starting to get excited about India's prospects for the World T20. But again, there's, like you said, this strategy may not always pay off all the time, and they continue to back their approach, and not panic and go back to their, almost seems like a comfort level for them is to just kind of take the game slow and then accelerate in the second half when it comes to batting. So overall, I'm happy with India's approach. Still 3 games left, and England are a very, very good T20 side. So I think we'll see. I think in the next three games we'll see if India will stick to this approach or if they get rattled and then decide, well, let's just stick with what we're comfortable with.
Kohli is a bit reactive, right? But I think now he's realized that they have the kind of players they need to sort of do that, bat hard. And
Right.
I think they're trying to give it a long run. They tried it previously as well, but it sort of didn't come off. I think in the previous series, I don't remember which one, before COVID, I think. But yeah, so I think they're trying to give it a long run. And I think Washington Sundar is part of that plan because he gives them that batting depth.
Right.
And with Shardul, they sort of bat till 10. So you have that buffer. So I think Jadeja's batting form has really elevated itself. And when he comes back, he'll walk into the side. Obviously, Kohli loves him. He feels very well. He bowls decently in T20.
Right.
So yeah, with Jadeja, Washington, and Shardul, I think they sort of have the capability to bat until 8 or 9, and that should give people like Kishan and Rahul and all a free rein at the top of the order with Kohli playing anchor. So I think it's a
Yeah.
very exciting template.
I mean,
Yeah.
suddenly India seems to be spoiled with too many batsmen to pick from. People are talking about, the likes of Shah, Prithvi Shah, Mayank, Agarwal, Shikhar Dhawan, they're all on the sidelines. And you're now trying to fit in Surya Kumar Yadav in. And now there's talk of like, well, we probably need like a sixth bowling option, just like as a backup. So suddenly we have a lot of players to pick from. I think
Right.
if there's one thing that Indian team management hasn't always been good with is selection of the playing 11. So that is going to be very critical in for India's chances in the upcoming T20s.
Yeah, I think Hardik is crucial to that plan because if he can bowl 4 overs decently, then
Right.
that lends a lot of balance. And I think they're going in the right direction with the batting because England have shown the way in terms of how you should play T20, and India are trying to replicate that. And they finally have the right set of players for that. Now they have to be a little bold and sort of think about keeping Rohit or Dhawan out of the 11,
Mhm.
depending on, because Kishan needs to be there at the top of the order. So that means either Rohit or Dhawan won't play or Rahul won't play. So they have to take that call. But yeah, they're finally moving in the right direction with the right set of players. So
Yeah.
I'm hopeful about the World Cup.
Yeah, exciting times for, I mean, it's good to see the Indian test side has been consistently good for a while now. The limited overs, I feel, has been kind of back and forth. Sometimes they've been on top and then kind of they struggle for a while. But based on the last few series, it's encouraging signs. And with a big season coming up, with the T20 World Cup, I'm glad to see that they made these changes where they brought in someone like Ishan Kishan and Surya Kumar Yadav. So yeah, let's see where this goes now. Well, it's been just over a week since the test series between England and India ended in a convincing 3-1 victory for Virat Kohli and men. Even in COVID-19 times, the cricket calendar moves so fast that we're already on to the T20 internationals between the two sides. Still, it's worth taking our time and gathering our thoughts on a very eventful series that sent India into the World Test Championship final and England back to the drawing board. To break it all down, the Last Wicket welcomes a returning James Marsh, aka at Pavilion Opinion, who no doubt will mount a spirited defense of England's performance. James, welcome back.
Yes, hello. You might find my defence about as spirited as England's against Axar Patel, to be perfectly honest with you, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Well, the last time we had you on the show, which was also our first ever episode, we had a very in-depth conversation about England's prospects given their win in Sri Lanka. So what do you make of the final scoreline?
Well, not much of a surprise, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, I'm sure we'll get into the nitty-gritty of it, but I mean, this is just, in very broad terms, this is what India do to sides at home. They swat them away and swat away groundsmen, if necessary, as well, and replace them. So, no, I wasn't greatly surprised, to be honest, by the final result.
So would you say you were surprised or shocked when England won the first test in a very convincing manner?
Well, yes. I mean, just because for an away side to really win any test in India is a huge achievement. But I suppose I mean, I was going to come to this a little bit later, but just after the huge mental and physical energy that was expended by India in winning in Australia, I I was still surprised England won, but India were, it was perhaps a little bit anticlimactic having to turn up just to play England at home or the triumph of Australia.
Right.
But in general terms, yes, I was, but we'll come to that, I guess.
Okay, well, let's get to it then. Why don't you give us a quick recap of what happened in the first test, and we'll go from there.
Okay, all right. Well, it was played at the JPAC, so and surprisingly for the home of the Super Kings and in Srinivasan, there were some allegations of nepotism to start
Wow,
concerning
that's surprising.
concerning, as I said, the groundsman. He was a guy who came in. He hadn't prepared a first-class pitch before, but it was perhaps a little bit unfair that he was characterised in that way. He did have quite a sort of history behind him. But anyway, so I mean, England were able to put 500 on the board. J Root doubled up, made 200, but that was the last time 200 was mentioned in the context of England's batting because the entire side didn't manage to reach it for the rest of the series. Anyway, so India were always behind in the game then, so they made 337 in the first innings. Second innings, there was a bit of a sign of things to come. Ashwin took a 5 but then England were just too far ahead, and with the help of some sort of typical nuclear bananas from James Anderson, they managed to polish India off a pretty comfortable win. So towards the end of the India's second innings, Ishant was batting, and the bail mysteriously blew off his stumps behind him. And for some England fans, if I may, it was almost like the sort of ghost of Andy Flower's rain had swooped down and done something, because it was a very sort of it was this sort of very sort of total grinding. I think grinding was the word Kohli used actually to describe England's performance, but it was just this very sort of total, not necessarily thrilling cricket, but just sort of overwhelming cricket they sometimes played under Flower. So yes, so that's where we were. So I mean, my first question to you both was going to be the point we touched on earlier. So I mean, why do you think India were so flat, if you like, in this first game?
I think Shastri's talked about that. He did say that they were asleep and they needed to kick up their backside in classic Shastri fashion. So I think they were a little complacent, and they didn't expect sort of England to put up a fight. The wicket was also kind of flat. And if I remember correctly, Shahbaz Nadeem and Washington Sundar bowled without much control. So I think that's where India lost the game. I think conceding 578 or whatever they made in the first innings was kind of where they lost the game. And there's no coming back after that, because they could have batted a little better in their first innings. But yeah, once you give out 578 on that sort of a pitch that was very flat,
I've mentioned this before that England won the toss. I wonder how different the story would have been if India had batted first and put up a large total, and then the pressure was on England to get close to it or to take the lead. And I feel that could have completely changed the complexion of the game. And two, and I think this is not really talked about much, and I think it is important, there were no crowds in that first game. They only started coming back from the second test onwards. In India, the crowd factor is huge, right? For overseas teams who are not fully confident, who are a little intimidated when they come, and especially the batsmen, when you're on the field and you're facing a spinner and you're surrounded by all these close-in fielders and you can hear the crowd essentially baying for your blood, that has a tremendous effect on the psyche. And a lot of touring teams in the past have mentioned that. And I feel for England, they came on the high of the Sri Lanka series win. They got to bat first, and Root led the way with a magnificent innings. And from there, they were essentially unstoppable. And to Himanish's point too, for India, justifiably after the Australia series win, there was still that hangover, and England capitalized on it. So, and they didn't do too badly. Looking at the score, they still put up decent scores in both innings. But obviously, the difference was the first innings for England, where Root's double ton, Stokes 85, that essentially, sealed it in their favor. So that is why I think India were not up to it in the first game, but to credit to this team, especially under Shastri and Kohli, a very refreshing aspect is that they don't just linger on what went wrong, and they always focus on getting back up, getting back into the fight. And we're seeing it right now in the T20 series, but especially in the Test series, and they showed that in the previous series against Australia. There's a lot of fight in this team. So yeah, the first Test was an aberration, but still full credit to England for the way they played.
Okay. Well, if I could just come on to spin a bit then for my second point. So obviously India had Nadeem who came in. I think they'd seen England bar route struggling against Imbaldenia in Sri Lanka against the left arm orthodox. But obviously it wasn't a particularly glorious game for India's spinners. But I know you guys did a show looking at England against spin. So I just wondered if you wanted to sort of, if you noticed how England had played spin in that first game any better than the rest of the series, or if it was just purely a dull pitch and India maybe not having their frontline spinners in, bar Ashwin.
So definitely a dull pitch. But if you look at Shahbaz Nadeem's numbers, he was accurate. So he bowled 93% of his balls at a good length, but his average speed was 84.1, which is a couple of km per hour lower than the others. So he was too slow through the air. So if you look at the shots England played in the first test, they were able to go down the pitch or back fast. And that's why they could hit these bowlers. I think that's what the difference was. So when Axar came in after that, he's bowled much quicker. His average speed is 89.7. So that's 5 higher. So they couldn't do the same against him. So I think that was a big factor. So
okay, all right, Benny, what did you think? I mean, what did you make of India's spinners in the game?
I was going to say I'm not even going to attempt a technical explanation because Himanish is the expert. As just just casually observing the game, just watching it, the thing that I got was, and England has done this in the past. They really love the sweep shot. That's their response to anything that spins, any ball that deviates in a slow manner. But it worked for them. Root was especially good. Stokes was very good. And the England batting as a whole, like they just projected more confidence, which is why the subsequent test where it was surprising why England didn't capitalize on that. But yeah, I thought it was a lot more assured, a lot more confident, and I was not necessarily surprised with the way they batted. England are a good test side, despite some of the glaring weaknesses in their side. Overall, they're still very good, and I was always expecting them to really compete and dominate certain passages of play. And Root, who doesn't really get talked off in the same league as, like the Kohlis and the Williamsons, the Smiths, he's really good. And we talked about this in a previous episode. He's probably the most consistent batsman in international cricket. So not at all surprised. And they capitalized on inexperienced spinners, barring Ashwin. Nadeem and Sundar are not in the same league as Ashwin and Jadeja. So they capitalized pretty well. And yeah, it was a pretty good performance.
Okay, well, just on to my third point then, which is related. Obviously, in this game, Nadeem struggled a bit. And then Kuldeep Yadav, when he came in, although perhaps he was a little bit underbowled, also had a few struggles. So I know all the talk was about England's struggles against spin, but I wondered, I know this is perhaps a slightly ludicrous question, but I mean, if you were in any way concerned about the spin ranks in India at the moment, in terms of the next cabs off the rank.
You say spin wanks?
Spin ranks. Oh my God, biggest dickus. Sorry. Yes, apologies. That's I shouldn't be teaching children this filth, should I?
Hope
No, anyway, sorry, I meant, so in terms of your India having reserve, in terms of, if I could just raise the tone off the floor, Benny, thank you. In terms of, obviously it seems silly to say it in a series when England were completely destroyed by spin, but maybe India's sort of second tier spinners could be a bit of a worry. But I just wondered what you thought about that.
I was disappointed with Nadeem because he had a very good debut, I remember, and there was a lot of chatter since then about how unlucky he is just because of India's spin quality in Ashwin and Jadeja, Kuldeep. You know, these three are considered like the frontline spin attack. Sundar sneaked in, in Australia, but all credit to him. He capitalized on his chances. Obviously, his batting was more impressive than his bowling, but even then, with his bowling, even if he was not like a huge wicket taker along the lines of Ashwin, he still did it. He performed his role, and he did a good job. Uh, but all things considered, when Nadeem got his chance in the first test ahead of Kuldeep Yadav, which was a surprising decision, I fully expected him to cause havoc, and I was disappointed. And I don't want to pin it all on the bowler because again, we are expecting bowlers who have such long gaps between games. He played his quite a while back, and then he came in, dropped into the first test, and it's kind of unfair to expect him to just immediately get in there and pick wickets. I understand India has set a very high standard for spinners, especially at home. Um, and I think it was the weight of expectation which made it all the more concerning. I think if he got like 4 or 5 games at a stretch, he would be more. I think he would make a better case for himself. This coincided with, again, going back to Root and Stokes, they were just simply on, they were in good form. They negated him very well. And so I wouldn't read too much into it. Same thing with Sundar. He's very lucky to be playing Test cricket, first of all, despite the fact that he is, put up some good performances. But he needs a lot of domestic cricket, like first class cricket, to become anywhere close to the finished product. So anything from him as a bowler is really a bonus at this point. So overall, not concerning. I thought, considering the opposition, considering the quality of Joe Root and Men, and the situation which these two were dropped into, they did as well as they could, with some few improvements that could have been done.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, just a bit of luck going against India because that pitch was very flat when England were batting. And Nadeem is like vastly experienced. He has like 400 first class wickets. His average is a little high. It's 29. But yeah, just a bit unlucky that he got caught on that pitch with Root and form. That being said, it is a bit of a concern that there's no one sort of lighting up the first class scene as a spinner in India after Ashwin and Jadeja. Now with Akshar Patel coming in, maybe there's hope. But he with two matches under his belt, we don't have enough data to sort of say what he'll do. So it's promising, but there's no one sort of, ready to take up the mantle after Ashwin and Jadeja. Yeah.
Okay.
It is a bit of a concern.
Well, maybe they'll have to change all those Ranji pitches back so they're more spin friendly again.
Oh.
Isn't it? Is the great
Here come
irony.
all the articles. Here come all the articles now. Well, James, what did you make of Rishabh Pant's assault on Jack Leach? That was a fascinating passage of play where Jack Leach, considered to be I think he is England's #1 spinner over Dom Bess. That seemed to take a toll on Leach in that moment. He came back well since then, yes. But in that moment, it seemed to really dent his confidence. What did you make of, Pant's approach against Leach and how Leach came back?
Well, I mean, it's viscerally thrilling, isn't it? Really, I mean, that's the only real reaction you can have to Pant's knocks, other than sort of just laughing like a maniac about them. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting what you say about how Leach reacted, because lots of people were saying like, oh, he's a strong guy. I mean, I didn't know how much people know about him. He's had a few struggles in his life. He's got Crohn's disease, which he's talked about quite openly and things like that. And everyone was saying, oh, he's such a tough guy, it won't affect him. And then I heard him interviewed, and he said, yeah, it was bloody awful that night, alone in my hotel room, thinking about how Pant took me apart. But yeah, I mean, he quietly, or I suppose not so quietly, just had a very decent series after that. And I suppose the way a lot of spinners are going to have to think about Pant is that, you can almost compartmentalize it, and the way that possibly bowlers had to do with Gilchrist in the past, and not take it personally, I think, to some extent.
I mean, I think it's a badge of honor for Pant to pick you and target you.
Well, literally, yes. Yeah.
Also, Joe Root is now joined highest with Michael Vaughan as the most test wins as skipper, 26. What do you make of that, Joe Root in Michael Vaughan's company?
Well, I'm not sure I'd ever want to be in Michael Vaughan's company, so it's not something I want to particularly think about. But well, yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I know Vaughan does get a lot of stick, but I think he was, he was quietly behind the scenes. He was an excellent man manager, and it's just little things like after the drawn test in the 2005 Ashes, when the Australians were celebrating on the balcony, he just got the team out and said, "Look, this is one of the greatest teams of all time, celebrating a draw." And so he was. I think as a man manager and motivator, Vaughan was pretty good. I don't really fully understand Joe Root, to be honest. I don't mean that like he's complex or whatever. I think he's a product of a slightly different era when players are a bit more savvy, maybe because of social media. So we perhaps haven't seen so much of his personality. But I mean, it's very rare, even now in the days of social media, when all sorts of things can leak out from dressing rooms. But it's hard to remember any occasion, I think, when a player has sort of bitched about Root. So I think from that point of view, he's obviously a very popular captain. But again, I mean, in terms of strategy and that sort of thing, we'll have to to defer to him and Ish, I think. But anyway,
he's just been unremarkable again in a good way. He's been very unremarkable, or it's kind
He's very quiet and unassuming, and he hasn't carved out a niche for himself, but he's just there.
Like
he's nice and he's just there.
I can't think of anything memorable like in his test captaincy. Like, how did he sneak up to 26 test wins? Like, I don't get it, but it's working for England, I think.
I think he cleverly chose to be born in the same era as Anderson and Ward.
That is true.
Which is unfair to put all his success down to that, but it hasn't hurt, obviously.
Right. All right. Well, let's move on to the second test. So India and England regrouped for the second bout on the same ground, except things turned out much differently this time. So first of all, crowds were allowed back in the stadium at reduced capacity. And then India won the toss and elected to bat. And from there on, there was only one side in control. So led by a brilliant 161 from a rejuvenated Rohit Sharma, India posted 329, which was followed by what can only be described as a meek performance from England as Ashwin took over. So Ashwin took a fifer, then came out to bat in India's second innings to score a century in front of an adoring home crowd to set England a target of 482. Joe Root and men were never really in the hunt as Ashwin and debutant Axar Patel combined to pick 8 wickets and seal a comfortable win by a margin of 317 runs. As far as talking points from this test are concerned, there are quite a few, but none as big or debatable as the pitch, which just continued to be a sore topic for the remainder of the series. James, as a longtime follower of England, you've probably seen quite a few subcontinental tours. What do you make of this debate that seems to pop up every time, it's particularly when they come to India and they struggle against spinners?
Well, it's slightly tedious, I suppose. I mean, I think the pitch in the third test was rated as average by the ICC today. I think the results came in today. The second test, I'm not sure what it got. Yeah, well, I mean, it's probably, I don't know if it's a British thing or just a human thing. I mean, it's just easier to blame conditions and other people than yourself. But I mean, this isn't just specific to India. I was just thinking back to when we were blown away in Bangladesh as well a few years ago. Mahdi Hassan, I think, in possibly his debut. Yeah, exactly. So I can't remember what sort of pitch chat there was about it then. But no, I mean, I suppose the thing in this series was that it wasn't even really along national lines, the disagreements about the pitches. I mean, you even had Yuvraj Singh sort of making comments about the pitch, and which was taken as a bit of an insult, I think, to I can't remember the bowlers he named.
Aksh-
I think Harbhajan perhaps, maybe.
Harbhajan and Kumble.
Kumble, yeah. So, I mean, I think it's, when the pitches in the second and third test were puffing up on day one, I suppose for an English person, it's more terrifying than an awkward silence or something. But I mean, I don't know. I'd be very interested more to hear what you guys think.
We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, and I maintained that you have to see how both teams perform on the same pitch. India did well, 329. Rohit Sharma scored 161 runs. And I would think if it was such a vicious stunner, I think both sides would have struggled. So I don't think it's fair to put it all on the pitch. You have to respect the quality of the opposition, like from the England's perspective, I mean. You have to accept your limitations and say, to England's credit, I don't think the players themselves made a big stink about it. I think Joe Root mentioned that we have to get better at, to playing in these conditions against these kinds of bowlers. So yeah, recognizing your own limitations, accepting that you have work to do, and your answer to everything cannot be just one shot. So I thought it was unfair, but I know Himanish, you shared some thoughts last time on it too.
I mean, I think they just got spooked out of hitting the sweep because of that pitch, because there was dust coming off and the bounce was kind of uneven. And Axar was bowling quick and fast and so on. And he had that bounce going on. And after that, they didn't have an answer to the spin. Like they had only one answer and they couldn't use that. And they just got spooked out of their plan. Yeah. That pitch really led to this, mental disintegration for them. Yeah.
No, so I just going to say, I mean, I think it does also come back to what you were saying earlier about the whole atmosphere side of it, even without a crowd in. I think, just this sort of events that Asian sides make of every delivery when there's a spinner on. I think it's impossible that it doesn't cloud the judgment of players when they're trying to come up with decisions on the spot, how to play spinners. And it was hard not to look at how England played. Some of the shots that were played, I can't remember if Bairstow's 2-ball duck, when the first ball he was retrieved on DRS, was that second test, or if it was, I think it was maybe the third actually.
I think it was the
third.
Anyway,
the point is, it's for all the talk of the pitch and the ball, I think, as Himanish says, there was a degree of just mental confusion and disintegration about it. So
I think it can be best. I think it can be best highlighted by the fact that debutant Akshar Patel, over both innings, he took 7 wickets for 100 runs. He is not someone you would call a prodigious turner of the ball, right? I think it was mentioned that quite a few of his wickets in the series were essentially straight ball. What did you make of his debut? What did you make of his bowling style and England's struggles against him?
Well, he was just incredibly impressive, incredibly accurate. I mean, I'm sure Himanish can give us perhaps more technical analysis of him, but I mean, he was fairly metronomic, and he was clever in that he just, as you say, he was prepared to just get natural variation. But and then I mean, in England just panicked and he got into their heads. And I mean, I know everyone says you're getting out to the straight ball, but it was the ones that were turning off somewhere towards Sri Lanka that were planting the doubts in their heads. But yeah, I mean, it's to come in and be that sort of metronomic on your debut was incredibly impressive from him.
Especially to come in for Jadeja and make it's very, very impressive to come in and not really make you miss Jadeja. I mean, obviously Ravi Jadeja brings batting, fielding, and bowling, so he's the complete package. But as a bowler to support Ashwin and then even like overshadow Ashwin to some extent at various stages, I thought that was brilliant. So Himanish, what did you make of his tactics against the batsmen?
I think it's very simple. He's very accurate, and as I'm looking at the numbers, 23.5% of his balls were hitting the stumps, which is the highest for all the spinners. So wow. you just keep at the stumps and they'll make a mistake or they'll miss one. And that's what his modus operandi is, which is what Jadeja does as well. And that's what happened. In Chennai, if you see, he got 4 of his wickets with the balls turning out and 3 of them with the balls turning in or holding their line. So basically, it's just very difficult to play him, because he's so accurate. He just keep at you right there, which
Right.
is very simple, but it works, right?
Yeah. And in a way, it almost makes me think it's almost like a limited over approach to it, like firing the ball in. But he adjusted very
Yeah.
well to the long format.
Well, England faced a very limited number of overs because throughout the series,
Yes.
that's definitely true.
All right. So 1-1 heading into the third test. So, James, why don't you tell us what happened there?
Okay, all right. Well, this was the day-night test, so England were rubbing their hands somewhat, thinking the ball was going to swing all over the place. So they packed their team with seamers, but all turned out rather differently. They got rolled for 112 and 81. India didn't do that much better in their first innings. Patel took 11 wickets in the match. It was the 100th test for Ishant as well, for Ishant Sharma, and India had given Nathan Lyon a T-shirt for his 100th test in Australia, but England could really have given Ishant some slippers for his, because seamers just ultimately were not really in the game at all. And again, it led to all sorts of discussion about the pitch and so on and so forth. But so I mean, my first question was, I mean, this was all very much obviously centered around England's strategy, but on that wicket, it all finished in 2 days. So do you guys think which international side would have countered Ashwin and Patel substantially better than England? I guess you could say any, but I mean, what I mean is, are we putting too much blame on England and just not focusing on the brilliance of Ashwin and Patel?
I mean, for the third test, yes, I don't think anyone could have countered them, because sort of combined with the lacquer on the pink ball and the pitch, which was sort of hard without grass, it's sort of physically impossible for you to play. So it's hard for you to play no matter who you are. So it's just a combination of all those things which caught England, and India was just the better side by a hair's breadth at that point. So yeah, so it's just hard to play on that kind of a pitch with that ball. Usually you see grass on the pitch with the pink ball, but that wasn't the case here. And this was a new thing for everyone to see. And yeah, it was just difficult. It was just, scooting off the pitch without turning.
I think most teams would
Okay.
have struggled, but probably not as badly as England did. Again, without trying to sound demeaning to the English batsmen. But like you mentioned, right? I saw the tweets from Jofra Archer. I don't know if Broad tweeted something, but they were also excited prior to the test. It was all, they all had it in their mind that this is going to be like a very pacer-friendly wicket. And I think they just got caught flat-footed by spin. They didn't expect spin to play such a huge ball in a huge role in a day-night test, and I think that just threw them completely off. I feel, I mean, if we are talking about other teams with not just in terms of skill, but in terms of fight, I think New Zealand would probably have done a decent job. I mean, again, we're talking hypotheticals here. It's hard to say who would have done, but I would think a team like New Zealand, they fight, they don't just give up or give in too easily, and they put everything else, like all the pitch talk or the condition of the ball, anything, they just keep it aside and just focus on the game. So in that purely hypothetical scenario, I think New Zealand would have done pretty well.
Okay, yeah, all right, fine. Well, look, if I can just move the discussion away from England slightly, there were a couple of slightly dubious TV umpire decisions in the match.
Yes.
Rohit was reprieved, I think, for a stumping, and also perhaps more controversially when there was a back pat, but the third umpire didn't seem to bother to watch all of the available replays. So I just wondered what you two thought about the third umpiring in the series and that match in particular. Obviously, we haven't got neutral umpires at the moment, but I mean, do you think there's any truck whatsoever in England's? At least we had some variation in our whinging here, not just about the pitch, but about the third
Yes.
umpire. So I just wondered if England had any sort of case in their complaints.
I know in this case, I understand England's frustration on it because I did watch that live and I was thinking that, listen, first of all, why aren't neutral umpires there, right? If overseas players can come to India, we can get overseas umpires to India as well. Jason Holder mentioned this recently about neutral umpires, elite umpires. It's their job, and if we can make all the necessary arrangements for the health and safety of players and the support staff, you can do that for umpires who are essentially who what travel in like twos or threes.
And
Because
broadcasters
yeah, so
and commentators.
Yeah.
right, so we make all these allowances for everyone else. Why can't we get umpires too? Right, because this is what happens, right? Let's take the fact that umpires are human, they're bound to make mistakes, but the way it is structured in cricket is you only notice the umpires when they do a mistake. Probably and wicket keepers too, but especially umpires, that's when you notice them. And especially if they're home umpires, then guess what? That's when all the insinuations, the accusations start flying around, and that is not something you want to do. And I don't know how or why, but it always seems to pop up the most in any game that involves England. But in this case, I remember how fast the decision was made, and there was no proper explanation for why. And I think it should just be a standard process, right? Which 99% of the time they follow it, but in this case, it just seemed too fast. They didn't even follow through on the entire delivery. So in this case, England had a very justified reason to be upset. And I think it just goes back to, and we've talked about umpiring before, and we'll probably continue talking about it in the future too. But it is such a critical part of the game that if you're going to be making the effort to really make the game as watchable and non-controversial as possible, just focus your attention on the actual cricket. The umpiring is something that you cannot just you cannot do short shrift for that. You have to get the best umpires. You have to get that elite panel umpires. Like, I don't understand why it's such a thing where they don't get the neutral umpires in. So justifiable
Okay.
complaints. I think the umpiring quality could have been much better, uh, but that in itself was not the cause of England's struggles. So let's make that clear.
Okay. All right. Well, it would be terrible news for Twitter if we all had to concentrate on the cricket and not
Yeah.
the
But Twitter is made
whinging
for
and
that, right?
controversy.
Twitter is perfect for that. That's where we
Yeah,
come to rant
it is.
against all the things, including the
Yeah.
cricket.
Exactly. All right. Well, look, I just alter my third point a little bit. Because I checked, it was the game when Bairstow made his two-ball duck. He strayed out and he did. I think he did actually try to sweep first ball and it hit him on his shoulder or something. He was reprieved, and then the second ball, Axar got him through the gate. So just on the topic of Bairstow and maybe more broadly on the rotation thing that Benny, you and I spoke about. So, I mean, I just wondered, you were quite disappointed that Bairstow didn't.
I was.
I'm not bringing this up out of malice, but you were quite you were surprised Bairstow was being rotated as he was, and so yeah, I just wondered what you made of his performance, but more generally, how you think the rotation thing went for England.
Well, first of all, I was part bemused and surprised because I really expected. There's a reason why I rate Bairstow highly. I mean, when you see again, let's make it clear: formats are different. The limited overs format, the long form, they're different. They're different games altogether. But the way Bairstow approaches spin in T20s and in the one-day internationals, it always gives me it always surprised me why he doesn't have that same level of success in Test cricket, and it was purely for that reason. I really expected him to do well against India, considering he's faced Indian spinners, day in and out throughout the IPL, and it went beyond struggle because he didn't even last long to struggle.
I mean, the sample size was too low to sort of conclude anything because he just went off after like 4 balls.
Right. He didn't even stay long enough to classify he's in bad form or he's struggling. He was just in and out in a flash. And that 2 ball was like the most fascinating knock, quote unquote. because he
Mm.
got out in both balls, actually, didn't he? Like it felt like he got out of both balls or very
Yeah.
close. Uh, so yeah, I'm really surprised that he didn't play a much more you know uh, effective. He didn't have a bigger impact on the series or for the time he was there. And going back to that rotation, this is my personal opinion, of course, but I think for all the valid reasons that Ed Smith has for the rotation, keep in mind that other teams, especially like India, they're probably playing the same amount of cricket during these times and quite a few other teams now, including West Indies. But when it comes to rotation, I think there is a bit of over analysis or overthinking on the England team management's part, rather than keeping it simple. You could rest players in between
Mm.
or during the series, like in between games. I don't understand the rationale between just entire series or like half of the series. I think it's very confusing, and I thought we saw that with Moeen Ali too, just like having to that the whole confusion about whether he was going home on
Yeah.
his own regard
Yeah.
or it was a team management decision. I think
Yeah.
it just opens up, so especially if England is not doing well, it just opens up a lot of questions about, is this the right approach? Is this messing with team strategy? If you're winning, it's different, but if you're losing, it just brings it into stark focus. And I know we talked about, if this rotation thing, what are the benefits of it? Now that we are on the other end, I don't really know if that was the best choice by England. If they came in with the mindset of, well, we're preparing, we want to keep our eye on the Ashes, we want to keep our eye on the T20 World Cup, in that regard, I think it was great. But if they came with the approach of winning the series in India, that was not the right approach. And I thought it backfired on them.
Okay. Well, Ed Smith, he'll almost take that as a compliment, I should think. Any overthinking. That's what's it. Him and Isha, what did you think about maybe the rotation in principle
Nothing
and
much to
in
add
practice?
beyond what Benny said.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
think it was a little confusing why they rested Anderson for the second test. But overall, I think they're just trying to prioritize the Ashes and the World Cup. And I don't know if it really factors in the performance overall, because they would have lost anyway because they batted so poorly. Bowlers
Yeah.
were so good from India. But it's just like a little confusing that they overthink it.
Okay. All right. So, right, can we please move on from the third test? not
Well,
that the fourth is much better, but
well, there was one bright moment for England in that test. Joe Root picked 5 wickets for 8 runs.
of course, yes, yeah.
That was
Oh,
how did that make you feel, James?
Um, well, it made me feel younger. It made me feel like it was whenever it was, 2008, was it, when Pup picked up his? I can't remember when
Yes,
it was. Yeah,
yeah, we talked about that. There was
yeah,
a
yeah,
6 for 9, and then in Mumbai he picked a bunch of
yeah,
wickets.
yeah. Well, no, it was wonderful, but I mean, in a way, we were praising his man management earlier, but I mean, how must poor Don Best have felt watching
Mhm.
this? So it was actually very vindictive of Joe Root to show up his premium off spinner. But yeah, I mean, it was, well, maybe a little bit indicative that the pitch was somewhat spicy, but anyway, no, it was a bit of levity at least for England
Yes,
fans.
the one bright spot for England
Yeah,
in the 2 days, which I want to maintain that I was very upset when the game ended in 2 days and I didn't get to watch 3 more days of Test cricket. That was frustrating. I'm not a big
yeah.
fan of 2-day Test.
Well, I think England fans were on that particular occasion. Anyway, okay, all right. So
Yeah, so the first test was a classical spin story that got over rather quickly for England. They batted first, they got out for 205. The spinners took 8 wickets amongst themselves. We shouldn't forget to mention Mohammad Siraj, who got Joe Root out, who has a problem against that ball coming in, which I think was a key factor in the low score that England made. And then India were in a spot of bother themselves at, I think, 156 for 6. And then there was a brilliant counter attack from the lower order. Rishabh Pant playing this brilliant innings of 101. I think he was 14 of 33 at one point, and then he was 101 of 118. So he played this amazing innings. Washington Sundar batted like a top order batsman, made 96 not out. India got to 365. And then it was a classical story again, where England just collapsed for 135. I think the talking point here, as I mentioned before, was that England didn't have an answer to spin. And they tried to be a little too reckless against it, which is why they sort of got out. What do you think about that, James? Like their batting approach versus spin in this test match?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I think it was just, as we were saying earlier, it was just a legacy of what had gone before. So I think that, I mean, it was the classic. I mean, if you've been watching England as long as I have, you sort of recognise the signs of these classic collapses, and it's a mixture of sort of prodding and tentativeness from some players and just absolute recklessness from others, and not very much in between. So yeah, it wasn't anything particularly novel, unfortunately, when you've been watching England play for so long. I mean, it is a particular characteristic of our collapses that we do seem to have these extremes between prodding and being reckless. So yeah, but I think just after everything that had gone before, it was as much in the head by that point as in terms of their actual strategy on the park. So
I was going to say that the one thing that nobody can fault England for is the entertainment they offer through their collapses, because every team does that. Let's make it clear. India, Pakistan, West Indies, quite a few teams, they collapse, frequently or now and then. But there is something about an English batting collapse that is part tragic, part comical. So credit where it is due. I think the English, when they go down, they make sure that we're entertained. So I don't know. I mean, I've been watching cricket for over 20 years now, and the English struggle against spin is as old as India's struggle against seam and bounce. So I'm very curious to know what long-term changes will be made in England with regards to this. We talked about this last time about how Somerset, they got docked points for preparing spin-friendly pitches. But if that is the attitude, I don't see things changing in English cricket because India made some big changes, after years and decades of struggling on bouncy pitches or seaming pitches. They made some hard choices, and we're seeing the fruits of it now. And I think there's something similar in England that has to be done, especially for the young batsmen. It was hard to watch the likes of Ollie Pope struggle because he's such a exciting batsman. He looks like he's got some really good shots in his book. But to see him struggle against Ashwin, you just wanted him to do well. You wanted him to succeed. Dan Lawrence too. So I think they need to be given the support and the resources to really, improve.
Yeah, I mean, just what you say on pitches is interesting. I mean, I can't personally see it changing much. I just don't think there's people with the sort of personality and power of people like Shastri and Kohli. I'm not saying they were the ones behind the change of the pitches in the Ranji Trophy, but I think they're obviously a factor, and I can't really see anyone like that in England. I mean, I don't know. I can't really comment on how powerful the individual associations are in India, but I think the counties, they're not going to be pushed into changing their pitches. The other thing is we've obviously got the 100 coming in this year, and that's going to take up the middle section of the summer when the pitches are, or at least should be, taking the English weather into account, at their driest. So it's going to be a big chunk when younger spinners aren't going to play. So there's some talk of, even if we're not having first class matches, we could at least have some sort of, I don't know, sort of youth tournament or seconds thing still going on. So
right.
Younger bowlers get a chance, but I just can't see it happening, to be perfectly honest with you, that we'll have this sort of sea change of attitude the way that India did to some extent with their pitches.
That's not very optimistic.
Yeah, this was my follow-up question, which sort of Benny talked about perfectly, that is there any sort of reaction back home that, we've got to become better at playing spin, or is it just we don't care and we want to win the Ashes? It's a question of culture, right? A change of culture. We want to play spin better when we go to Sri Lanka or India.
Well, I think it is. I think what was noticeable about this trip, I mean, there was a lot of Peterson and Panesar did a lot of stuff, and from the bowling point of view, it made you realise just how individual Panesar had to be in terms of setting up his own plans. He talked about, I think, the 2006 series when he made his debut, then when he got Sachin as his first wicket. But he was speaking about how he took in his fielding plans to Flintoff, who was captain at the time, to his hotel room. And Flintoff just sort of laughed at him and said, "What on earth is this?" And I mean, he was actually very complimentary about Flintoff as a captain. But the other thing, it was, if you listen to Peterson talking about his preparations for the 2012 series, it was. I mean, I know everyone makes a big deal about the Dravid email that he got, that Peterson, when Peterson wrote to him, but it was just remarkable. Then Peterson was talking about how he went away and he was basically training on his own, setting up his own drills on the basis of what Dravid had told him in an email. And I mean, I'm not privy to how England train and how they practice for these particular challenges on Asian pitches, but I can't imagine that they prepare to this level of sort of nitty-gritty detail that Peterson did. So
Right.
I don't know. Sorry, I was almost moving into rant mode there. Sorry, I apologize. Sorry.
But I wanted to ask you, James, as a non-Indian observer, right? What's your perception of Rishabh Pant? Is it like Adam Gilchrist flashbacks? What do you think of him? Because there's a lot of debate in India about him, and everybody has an opinion.
Well, just wonderful. I mean, I just, I think I said to Benny when I last came on, I couldn't believe people were doubting him so much. But this actually comes back to what you're saying about the Ashes in Australia. In Britain, we see things through the prism of how people can do in Oz. And after his performance there 2 years ago, I thought it was incredible, but also incredible people were doubting him after that. So I just think he's wonderful. I mean, even today, he just came out. He was promoted, I think, up the order. I mean, I was looking forward to seeing Sky batting, yeah. I mean, if you have to watch Pant instead, I suppose you take it. But I just think he's such good news. His whole attitude to the game, and I think it was interesting in the Test series, in that first Test, how calculating he was, because I think maybe some of his doubters on the Indian side had to sort of say, well, look, this is actually a pretty calculating knock, and then the 100 as well, it was pretty calculating. So yeah, I mean, I want England to win, but if we lose being battered by Pant, it's a pretty decent second.
Yeah, it's a big compliment.
Yeah.
All right. So finally, Benny, what do you think about Washington Sundar? Because he's played only 13, 14 first-class games, but he's batting like a number 4 or a number 3, and he's opened for Tamil Nadu before. So he was just magnificent. What did you think of that?
Not at all surprised. I mean, Rishabh Pant and Washington Sundar used to open together for India. I don't remember. Under 19s, right?
The under 19 team.
He's got a lot of similarities to Ravi Chandran Ashwin in that regard. Both are primarily batsmen who worked on their bowling to become essentially spinners, off spinners for their team, who are also known for their batting. And if you have seen the little bit of batting that he has done, even in the IPL for that matter, even if he's not played any big knocks yet, just the calmness, the assuredness with which he plays, he bats like a proper batsman. And so not at all surprised about his skills. What did surprise me, pleasant surprise, was especially in Australia when, that final test, the way his partnership with Shardul Thakur in the first innings. And then in the second innings at a very, when the game was on a knife's edge, he hooked Pat Cummins for a 6. And
right.
Just to see him translate that to the highest level. And this is a pattern that I'm seeing with a lot of these younger Indian players. And I think there's been a lot of articles and a lot of people have talked about how the IPL has shortened that period of transition for these younger players where they jump from domestic or from IPL to the international stage. They're a lot more assured. They're a lot more confident in their skills. And I think Washington Sundar is a great example of that. He's always been known for that calm and that poise. But to see him transfer that very quickly to the international stage, it was a pleasant surprise. And then to show that it was not just a one-off, like his batting in the in the England series, the 85, and then followed by the 96, 97.
96 not out.
I I
Yeah.
was pleasantly surprised, very happy that he was able to transform his or transfer his batting skills to the international stage. I felt really bad for him. Obviously, if you have 3 wickets in hand and you're on 96, you would expect you would score that century, and then in the span of I don't know
Right.
4 or 5 deliveries, you're walking back stranded on 96. All thanks to, and you can't even blame Akshar Patel for that run out because he wanted to get that single so there could be on strike in the next over.
Yeah.
So it was a case of good intention, but ultimately that's what kind of led to Sundar missing out against
Yeah.
missing out on a century. So from edge of glory to heartbreak, uh, I felt very bad for Sundar, but very excited. I don't know how many more opportunities he's going to get in the future, if with the fully fit Ashwin, Jadeja, and I'm assuming Akshar Patel is going to be ahead of him now in terms of his bowling. So I don't know how many more opportunities he'll get. But it's very exciting to see him deliver in the few opportunities that he's been getting.
All right. So,
Yeah.
James, do you have something to add about that?
No, not really. I was just going to say it was just in praise of Ravi Shastri, which I always like to do because I don't think he gets enough praise. He tweeted during the IPL about Sundar's spell. I think there was a 200 v 200 at Mumbai RCB, and Sundar got I can't remember. I think it was almost single figures or something for his 4 over spell. And I think one thing Shastri does is sort of spot people that he thinks have got the mettle to come into the side, and Kohli too, to some extent. I know some people hate sort of speculating about this sort of wishy-washy sort of psychological side of things, but I think I think you could see there that Shastri didn't worry about chucking him in Australia because he knew he had the mental strength to do it, not just from that IPL game, of course. But anyway, it was just a good spot to have a player and so many Indian players come in and be able to perform. So anyway.
Right.
All right. So we'll move on to where England go from here. But before that, like, what are the 2 or 3 positives England have from this series, James? If you could find any.
You want 3?
That's very harsh.
I want 1. If you can give that. But yeah. I
Right.
thought Jack Leach was quite good.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think Jack Leach is. I mean, I think there's a slight danger in England. It's interesting with our left arm spinners because we've got. I mean, we have them sometimes. They always have to be a bit of a character, like Panesar. Nasser Hussain said he always hated the sort of I don't know, the fanfare, if you like, around Panesar because he said he thought it detracted from his brilliance with the ball. But yeah, I mean, I think because of the problems England had against spin and because of the problems that Dom Bess had just at times just landing the ball on the pitch, I think Jack Leach had a quietly pretty impressive series. So yeah, so definitely, I think you can take that as a positive. Also, I think, as I mentioned earlier, Lawrence in the final test, it was quite interesting. In the day-night test, they didn't pick Lawrence, and he was actually the chief ball shiner when he was playing. So that obviously didn't help the attempts to seam it either. But yeah, I think I can't remember, Benny. I think we spoke about Lawrence a little bit, and we said he was a sort of English batsman with a hint of the subcontinent to him because he is very, very wristy and quite calm and just trying to play the ball as late as he can. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how Lawrence goes, and then, as you say, Benny, if players like Pope can pull themselves together a bit. But I mean, more generally, this will all be forgotten once if we win against you in the summer, and then we're off to Oz. So this will be quietly swept under the carpet, I imagine, in terms of the debate about spin and pitches. And sorry, that's very somber. So Benny, have you got anything positive that you?
Well, I think there were two positives. I think Joe Root should be given a lot of credit for the way he led the team. Like I mentioned earlier, I think it's time that he is mentioned in the same league as Kohli, Williamson, Smith, and Babar Azam, for that matter. Um, we've talked earlier about his consistency, and he's a very good batsman against both pace and spin. And it is time to yes, it was just the one big double hundred at the start of the series, and then he kind of tailed off. But overall, his batting approach and his leadership, I think, is one of the bright spots for England right now. And so he led his team well, which leads me to the second positive. The whole series, at the end of the series, there was so much chatter from English journalists about the pitch and how it was, how there was one journalist who said India should be docked the WTC points. And
Yeah.
there was just a lot of controversy. And of course, Michael Vaughan had to chip in. But you never heard those complaints from Joe Root and men or from the coaching staff. And they kept reiterating. In fact, I think was it Jack Leach? They asked him before the fourth test about the pitch. And he said, yeah, the pitches have to improve in England. And
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
so that kind of attitude and that kind of approach, I thought at least augurs well. I know you said you're not very optimistic about England in the long run changing
Yeah.
their approach, but I think at least the attitude of the players is good in that they recognize that regardless of what the media says, what the perception is, ultimately it goes back to skills, and it's something that
Yeah.
they need to work on.
Yeah.
And I think that's very good. That's a big positive for them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Swan actually moved from quite a spinny pitch at Northam, so Wantage Road, to Trent Bridge because he wanted to test himself more. So I think it does show that there can be some emphasis on the individual, and I mean, I would like to see Swan join the army of backroom coaches that England have, not least because it would get him out of the commentary box. But I think it is a waste. I think it is, when you've got someone like Bess that clearly does have talent, and you've got someone like Swan just sitting on the sidelines. I do think it's a bit of a waste. So I hope they might look at.
What do you think are the chances in the Ashes now?
That's
an important thing, right?
Well, I don't. I mean, I still think there is quite a few sort of exciting things about this England side. I mean, Ollie Pope. I mean, I don't think you can write him off. I mean, and Zach Crawley. I mean, before India worked out that you just both spin to him, not see him. He obviously looked wonderful with that half century he made. So. Yeah, Root and then Lawrence. So I honestly don't know. I mean, this Australian side is perhaps breaking up a little, but I honestly don't know. I'm more. I want to be sort of un-English and just really focus on the summer, because I think it is going to be fascinating what happens to this group of players in the tests in the summer. So
okay, and Himanish, India are headed now to the World Test Championship final against Kane Williamson and company. What do you think their chances are? We know now that they're going to be playing in Southampton. I heard someone say that it probably should be more spin friendly. I don't know how true that is, but what do you make of the venue? What do you make of their chances against them?
Yeah, there are some numbers for the spin, but I think they're a little misleading because I think Moeen Ali got a chunk of those wickets against India and the tail and so on. But if the ball moves around, I'm not very confident about India doing well because they simply can't bat against swing. It's very hard for them.
Right.
That being said, they do have a very, very good bowling attack. And in terms of the bowlers matching up, I think it's head-to-head. It's toe-to-toe. And the batting will have to pull their socks up and sort of bail them out. I'm not very confident because it's New Zealand, it's in England. You have memories of 5 for 3, and then you have memories of New Zealand, and they can't bat well against the moving ball. So I think it'll be exciting to just watch this and see what happens. It's a new thing to investigate, right?
Historically, New Zealand have always played the spoil sport for India's chances in big tournaments, as far as I can remember. So yeah, it's not going to be an easy game at all for India, and I don't even know if we can label any particular team favorites at this point, especially when neither of them are playing in their home countries. I would think that the conditions would be more in favor of New Zealand, just because I feel overall their conditions are very similar, in England and New Zealand. But yeah, I think, like you said, it's very novel for us right now. We don't have much historical precedents to fall back on. So uh, I would think at least it should be exciting. Uh, James, can we count on your support for India?
Well, I'll be supporting Test cricket in the final.
Right answer.
But no, I mean, I am looking forward to. I mean, I think I made a terrible joke about on Twitter about how much like the World T20, because of COVID, the World Test Championship final will now have to be moved to India for health reasons. But they might have got almost the next best thing, because it is a bit more spin friendly at the Rose Bowl, as you say. But I think I was just looking, it's the 22nd of June, so sort of relatively early still in the summer, so you would expect it to be nipping about a bit. But I think I'm mainly just incredibly excited about watching Kohli eyeball Wagner and vice versa. I think that will be a pretty exciting thing to watch. So there's a lot to look forward to there, I think.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, I'm looking forward to that contest as well. I only worry for Neil Wagner's health sometimes with all his popping veins, that he's straining himself too much and potentially getting himself an aneurysm. But no, it should be a fascinating contest between India and New Zealand in the final. England, I think, will feel a little aggrieved that they couldn't make it to the final at home. I think it would have been a special occasion for them, especially after the World Cup win last year. But again, for them, probably the bigger prize is the Ashes. So it looks like they'll be preparing for that while India and New Zealand square off. But James, thank you for coming on and sharing your thoughts on the recently concluded series between India and England. It was not as exciting as the series down under was. I think everyone can admit that. But it still gave some good cricket, I think, especially for fans of spin, to see Ashwin and Axar Patel and even Jack Leach. I think credit should be given to him. He did a pretty good job, and he had to bowl to Indian batsmen. So full credit to him. I thought it was a fascinating and eventful series. So thank you for taking the time to dissect the series with us.
No, my pleasure. No, nice to be here. So I'm glad I lasted substantially longer than in England innings.
You did, and you did.
That's not a very high bar.
Exactly. No, I meant the team innings. Okay. No, thanks, guys. No, it was a pleasure as always to speak to you.
Well, that's it for this episode of The Last Wicket. Thanks once again to James Marsh for coming back on our show. You can find him on Twitter at Pavilion Opinion and follow his writing at Pavops on Substack. We'll add the links to the show notes. Meanwhile, do subscribe to this podcast to be notified of new episodes, follow us on your social media feeds, and do spread the word about the show. For more details, please visit our website at thelastwicket.com. Once again, thank you for listening, and we hope you come back for more. From all of us here at The Last Wicket, have a great week.